My name is Sophie Harrington. I'm 29 years old, and for 22 years, my parents treated me like I was broken. While my sister Victoria collected Stanford degrees and inheritance promises, they mocked my dyslexia at family dinners, excluded me from business conversations, and paid me barely enough to survive while she made six figures straight out of college. But at Victoria's graduation celebration at the Four Seasons, in front of 400 guests, a man I'd never met handed me an envelope that would shatter every lie my family ever told about me. What they didn't know was that Grandma had been watching everything. She saw it all, documented it all, and she left me something that would turn the entire Harrington empire completely upside down. The Harringtons were old money Boston, the kind of family whose name appeared on library wings and charity galas. My father, Richard Harrington, ran Harrington Development, a commercial real estate company my grandmother, Catherine, had built from a single office in Cambridge back in 1968. By 2024, the company was valued at $96 million. I was born with severe dyslexia, diagnosed when I was 6. Words on pages would flip and scramble, turning basic sentences into impossible puzzles that took me 4 times longer to decode than other kids. My parents' response wasn't patience or support. It was disappointment that eventually hardened into contempt. When I was 11, they hired private tutors for Victoria. Piano lessons at Berkeley, Mandarin immersion classes, SAT prep with a Harvard graduate who charged $500 an hour. When I asked about getting specialized help for my reading difficulties, my mother Elizabeth just looked at me with this exhausted expression and said, "Sophie, we've already spent thousands on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children simply aren't built for academic success." I was 11 years old, and I believed every word she said. So I learned to survive on my own. Audiobooks became my secret weapon. I developed systems using diagrams, color codes, and visual maps that helped me process information in ways traditional reading never could. And every Saturday morning, I'd take the train to my grandmother Catherine's brownstone in Beacon Hill, where she'd spend hours with me, teaching me to understand complex ideas through stories and pictures instead of dense paragraphs. "Sweetheart," she told me once, her weathered hand covering mine, "you process information differently than most people. But different doesn't mean deficient. You see connections others miss. That's not a disability, Sophie. That's a gift most people never develop." I didn't understand what she meant back then. It would take me another 20 years and one devastating betrayal to finally see what she'd been trying to show me. Christmas 2017. 23 relatives gathered around the mahogany dining table in my parents' Beacon Hill townhouse. My father stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised. "I have an announcement," he said. "Victoria has been accepted to Stanford Business School with a full merit scholarship." The room erupted. Applause, congratulations, the whole performance. Victoria smiled with that practiced humility she'd perfected over the years. "My eldest daughter," Richard continued, beaming, "will be the first Harrington to attend Stanford in 4 generations. She's going to elevate this family and this company to unprecedented heights." Then my father's eyes drifted down the table to where I sat. "And Sophie," he paused, and the warmth evaporated from his voice, "well, Sophie is also here with us tonight." A few relatives laughed. Those uncomfortable, throat-clearing laughs. Victoria didn't say a word in my defense. I stared at my plate, fighting back tears I refused to let them see. Under the table, a thin hand found mine and squeezed. Grandma Catherine, seated directly across from me, held my gaze with something fierce burning in her eyes. Something that looked almost like rage directed at her own son. She didn't speak. Not then. But 4 months later, she called me to her brownstone and said she needed to show me something important. I didn't know it at the time, but that Christmas dinner had set something in motion. Something that would take 6 years to detonate. After graduating from a state university in 2021, I applied for a position at Harrington Development. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative coordinator. Salary, $38,000 a year. That same month, Victoria joined as Director of Strategic Development. Her starting salary was $265,000 plus quarterly bonuses. My job consisted of making photocopies, scheduling conference rooms, and bringing coffee to executives who consistently forgot my name. I wasn't invited to a single strategy meeting, never shown a single client proposal, never given the slightest opportunity to demonstrate what I could actually do. But I paid attention. I watched and I listened. I discovered something about myself during those long afternoons in the copy room. I could identify patterns that others completely missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallways, I'd sketch diagrams showing the relationships between parties, the flow of capital, potential conflicts of interest. Grandma Catherine had taught me this. During those Saturday mornings, she'd spread out old contracts from the company's founding years and show me how to read them not word by word, but as systems, as interconnected structures. "Your father reads contracts like an attorney," she told me once in early 2018, just before her health started declining. "He looks for what he can leverage. You read them like an architect, Sophie. You see how all the pieces connect." That same morning, she'd handed me a small wooden box, walnut with brass corners. "Keep this somewhere safe," she'd said. "Don't open it yet. When the right time comes, you'll know." I'd taken the box home, tucked it in my closet, and tried to forget the strange weight in her words. April 2018. Grandma Catherine's brownstone. She was 84 then, her once powerful frame grown fragile. But her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, hadn't dimmed at all. "I built Harrington Development from absolutely nothing," she said. "One office, one assistant, 56 years of work. Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it actually means to create something from nothing." She pressed the wooden box into my hands again. "There's something inside that might help you someday. But not yet. You're not ready yet, and neither is Richard." Her grip on my wrist tightened. "When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll understand what to do." 20 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in hospice while she slipped away. I was the only family member at her bedside. The wooden box remained unopened in my closet for 3 more years. March 2024. The email arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. "Dear Miss Harrington, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated effective June 1, 2024. I read it 5 times. They were firing me. That evening, I stayed late organizing files that nobody would ever look at again. Through the thin wall separating my cubicle from my father's corner office, I heard voices. Richard and Elizabeth, having what they thought was a private conversation. "We can't have her here when Victoria takes over," my father was saying. "It looks unprofessional." The CEO's sister working as an administrative coordinator. My mother's response came gentle, almost sympathetic. "We've done everything we possibly could for her, Richard. Some children just don't have what it takes." "Exactly," my father agreed. "So she needs to go. We'll give her a reasonable severance package. She can find something else. Something more appropriate for her skill level." I pressed my palm flat against the wall. $38,000 a year. My apartment cost $2,000 a month. I had $600 in savings. If I lost this job, I'd be homeless within 60 days. Victoria's graduation celebration was tomorrow night. I wondered what other announcements my father had planned. The Four Seasons Ballroom. 400 guests filled the gilded space. I stood near the entrance in my $89 clearance rack dress while everyone else glittered in designer gowns. My mother intercepted me. "Sophie, you're at table 31. Near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself. And Sophie, tonight is Victoria's night. Whatever resentment you're feeling, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass this family." Table 31 was tucked behind a structural column at the back. From my seat, I could barely see the main stage. And near the main entrance, standing alone by the door, a gray-haired man in a dark suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't eating, just watching. His eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom. At 9 o'clock, the orchestra stopped. Lights dimmed. My father stood on stage, champagne flute raised. Victoria graduated in the top 3% of her Stanford MBA class. She completed an internship at Goldman Sachs. And last month, she made junior partner at McKinsey in record time. But tonight, I'm not just celebrating her achievements. I'm announcing her future. Victoria joined him on stage, radiant in emerald silk. Effective immediately, my father continued, Victoria Harrington will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence at 72 Beacon Street, currently valued at $15 million, and most importantly, the position of Chief Executive Officer of Harrington Development when I retire. The room exploded. Standing ovation, camera flashes. 400 people celebrating, and not a single person glanced toward table 31. And through the crowd, the gray-haired man by the door began walking directly toward me. The man stopped at my table. Miss Harrington, he said quietly. That's me. My name is David Morrison. He pulled a business card from his jacket. Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I was your grandmother's attorney. My grandmother. The words hit like a physical blow. She left something for you with very specific instructions about when I should deliver it. From inside his jacket, he produced a cream envelope, sealed with red wax bearing an official notary stamp. What is this? Her will. The real one. His voice dropped. The one your father doesn't know exists. I stared at the envelope. The notary seal read November 8, 2018. Your grandmother gave me explicit instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you. He glanced toward the stage. I believe that just occurred. For the first time, something almost resembling warmth flickered in his eyes. Your grandmother told me to tell you this. Give this to Sophie on the day Richard shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready. I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card. Then he turned and walked away. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom. I pushed through the service entrance, found an empty corridor near the kitchen. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside, 4 pages of dense legal text. I, Catherine Marie Harrington, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. My eyes caught on a paragraph in the middle of page 2. To my granddaughter, Sophie Ann Harrington, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Harrington Development LLC, currently valued at approximately $49 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I read it again. 51%. Controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Richard's treatment of Sophie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Sophie is not slow. Sophie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. A sob caught in my throat. She'd seen everything. Then I found the condition clause. To activate this bequest, Sophie must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void. 72 hours. The deadline would fall at exactly 9 o'clock on the evening of the 20th. 3 days from now. I leaned against the wall and understood what my grandmother had done. She'd given me a weapon. Now I had to decide if I was brave enough to use it. David Morrison was waiting by the coat check. You read it, he said. The 72-hour clause. Why would she put that in? Your grandmother knew you. She knew that if she gave you unlimited time, you might convince yourself not to act. The deadline isn't punishment, Sophie. It's permission to stop waiting for your family to change their minds about you. The deadline is 9 p.m. on the 20th. If you want to proceed, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you draft it. I looked at the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who'd seen my value when my own parents refused to. I'll call you tomorrow morning, I said. We're requesting that board meeting. Morrison allowed himself the smallest smile. She said you would. That night, I finally opened the wooden box. Inside was a handwritten letter on Catherine's personal stationery, a faded document from 1968, and a USB drive. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, then David has done his job and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1968 when I founded Harrington Development. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted without unanimous board approval. The USB contains something else. In early 2017, Richard proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 15%. His stated reason was that I was too old. The real reason was that he wanted complete control. The board rejected his proposal by 3 votes. I never forgot what he tried to do, and I never forgave him for using you as justification. Use this wisely, Sophie. Not for revenge. For justice. All my love, Grandma Catherine. I plugged the USB into my laptop. Board meeting minutes March 2017. Complete audio recording. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of power, documented and time-stamped. The next morning, I called Margaret Hayes. She answered on the first ring. Sophie Harrington, she said. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am? Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Cambridge together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. She also told me about the will 3 years ago. Then you know what I'm about to do. You want to request an emergency board meeting. That requires signatures from 3 board members. I'm one. You need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. Richard Harrington isn't nearly as popular as he thinks. His management approach is authoritarian. At least 5 board members have expressed serious concerns privately. They just need someone brave enough to go first. Margaret's tone shifted. Sophie, this isn't going to be pleasant. Your father will fight viciously. They'll say terrible things about you. They've been saying terrible things my entire life. At least now I get to respond. Margaret laughed. Catherine always said you had steel underneath all that quiet. I'm starting to see what she meant. I'll have the petition ready by tonight. Board meeting request for the 20th at 10 a.m. Richard found out about the board meeting at 5:30 p.m. Victoria called me 40 minutes later, her voice tight with fury. What did you do? I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just received notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting scheduled for the 20th. Requested by Margaret Hayes and 2 other directors. Margaret Hayes hasn't requested anything in 12 years. What did you do, Sophie? Maybe she has legitimate concerns about company management. Don't play games with me. If you're trying to embarrass us, I swear to God. I'm just doing my job, Victoria. Same as always. 20 minutes later, Richard stormed past my cubicle toward his office. Through the thin barrier, I heard him on the phone. This is ridiculous. Margaret's probably going senile. Sophie? My God, Victoria, she can barely read a basic spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled to myself. For the first time in 29 years, being underestimated felt like a tactical advantage. The elevator opened onto the executive floor of Harrington Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. Italian marble everywhere. The kind of corporate luxury designed specifically to intimidate. I stepped out wearing a borrowed navy blazer, carrying a leather portfolio I'd found at Goodwill for $9. The security guard at the boardroom entrance held up his hand. Name? Sophie Harrington. He checked his tablet, frowned. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Harrington Development employee and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted executive meeting. Is there a problem? Victoria's voice behind me. Sophie wants to attend the board meeting. I was just explaining that's completely inappropriate. Richard appeared at the end of the corridor. What's happening here? Sophie wants to attend the board meeting. Richard looked at me like I was a stain he couldn't quite remove. Sophie, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom, it does. Margaret Hayes appeared in the doorway. 74 years old, standing with the quiet authority of someone who'd been building empires when Richard was still in business school. I invited her. She has standing to address the board. Let her in. Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might physically block the entrance. Fine, my father said, his voice pure ice. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself completely. The boardroom was smaller than I'd imagined. An oval table of polished mahogany. 14 leather chairs. Portraits of past executives on the walls, including one of my grandmother Catherine. 14 board members took their seats. Richard at the head of the table, Victoria to his right. I was directed to a chair at the far end. Robert Chen, the board chairman, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Hayes, Thomas Brennan, and Linda Park. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret rose. The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently surfaced, a document that fundamentally affects the ownership structure of this company. I yield my time to Miss Sophie Harrington. All eyes turned to me. Victoria smirked. Richard leaned back with theatrical boredom. I stood, my hand steadier than I'd expected. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Richard sighed audibly. Before I could continue, my father raised his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's extremely valuable time, I need to provide some necessary context. Sophie is my daughter, his voice carried that patronizing warmth, and I love her very much. But she's not qualified to address this board on any substantive business matter. She works in an administrative support role. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience whatsoever. Victoria chimed in. Sophie also has severe dyslexia. She struggles significantly with reading comprehension. We've tried to support her, but some limitations simply can't be overcome with effort alone. What we're witnessing here, Richard continued, is a troubled young woman acting out. Sibling jealousy is unfortunately common in family businesses. Mr. Harrington, Robert Chen's voice cut through. You'll have an opportunity to respond. But Miss Harrington requested this time and she's entitled to use it. Richard sat down slowly. Victoria mouthed silently, You're embarrassing yourself. I looked at them both and felt something shift inside me. Something colder, clearer, more focused. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I pulled the document from my portfolio. I won't be discussing my reading ability today. I'll be discussing this. I held up the will. The room went completely silent. This is the last will and testament of Catherine Marie Harrington, founder of this company, notarized November 8, 2018. Richard's face drained of all color. That's impossible. My mother's will was executed in 2015. You have a copy of her previous will. Under Massachusetts law, a subsequent valid will automatically revokes all prior testamentary documents. This will was executed 3 years after the one you possess. I slid the document to Robert Chen. Mr. Morrison, would you please confirm the authenticity of this document? Morrison approached the table. I'm David Morrison, senior partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Catherine Harrington's personal attorney from 2006 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on November 8, 2018. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries and the original is held in escrow at State Street Private Client. Robert Chen studied the document. This will bequeaths 51% of Harrington Development shares to you, Miss Harrington. Murmurs rippled around the table. That's a forgery, Victoria said, but her voice had lost all its confidence. It's not, Morrison's response was immediate. And I'd strongly advise you against making accusations of fraud without substantial evidence. Morrison and Blake's reputation speaks for itself. Richard slammed his palm against the table. This is absolutely absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated? I pulled out my phone. Perhaps you'd like to explain this. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the boardroom. Catherine is 82 years old. She doesn't understand modern business operations. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 15% effective immediately. The recording ended. The silence felt absolute. That was a confidential board discussion, which Catherine attended and recorded, as was her legal right as a majority shareholder. Robert Chun set down the will. Miss Harrington, would you read the relevant passage aloud for the record? I nodded and read. To my granddaughter, Sophie N. Harrington, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Harrington Development LLC along with all voting rights associated therewith. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Richard's treatment of Sophie. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Sophie is not slow. Sophie was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I looked directly at my father. Richard has confused credentials with character. He tried to strip me of my voting rights because I saw through him. He marginalized Sophie because she reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. The will concludes, I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Sophie. Robert Chan removed his reading glasses slowly. David, you can confirm this document is legally binding? I can confirm that completely. As of this moment, Sophie Harrington is the majority shareholder of Harrington Development. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This doesn't prove anything, Victoria said desperately. Even if the will is valid, Sophie has zero business experience. I'm not asking to run the company. I'm asking you to examine the facts objectively. I pulled the 2017 board minutes from my portfolio. March 15, 2017. Richard Harrington proposed Resolution 2017-2004 to reduce Catherine Harrington's voting shares from 51% to 15%. That was taken out of context, Richard started. The resolution failed by 3 votes. I looked at Margaret. Is that accurate, Mrs. Hayes? Margaret nodded. It is. Catherine called me that night. She was devastated because her own son had tried to take everything she'd built. It's evidence that my grandmother wasn't suffering from diminished capacity when she wrote her 2018 will. She was protecting herself from her own son. And she was protecting me. Robert Chen looked around the table. Does anyone else have documentation that contradicts what's been presented? Complete silence. Thomas Brennan spoke. Robert, I think we need to recess and have legal counsel review these documents. Agreed. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. The board members rose. Richard didn't move from his seat, just sat frozen, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. 30 minutes stretched into nearly an hour. The board's legal counsel spent the entire time on his phone with Morrison and Blake and the Massachusetts probate court. Finally, he returned and whispered in Robert Chen's ear. Please take your seats. Our legal counsel has confirmed the following. The will presented by Miss Harrington is valid under Massachusetts law. It supersedes all previous testamentary documents. Effective immediately, Sophie N. Harrington holds 51% of Harrington Development shares. Additionally, as majority shareholder, Ms. Harrington has the right to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership. He looked directly at me. Ms. Harrington, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward? I stood slowly. I have one motion. Richard rose from his seat. Robert, sit down, Richard. Miss Harrington has the floor. Richard sat. His face had gone gray. I looked around the table at 14 people who'd never considered me capable of anything meaningful. The power to destroy my father's career was completely in my hands. I thought about what my grandmother would want. And I made my choice. I'm not proposing to remove Richard Harrington as Chief Executive Officer. The tension shifted dramatically. Victoria's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked surprised. What I am proposing is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Richard Harrington retains their confidence as CEO. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns within 30 days. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership. This is absurd, Victoria stood. You're turning this into a revenge fantasy. No. This is corporate governance. The same process Grandma Catherine established in our bylaws 42 years ago. I paused. If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about. Robert Chun studied me. Something like respect flickered across his face. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded, Margaret said immediately. Then we'll vote. All those expressing confidence in Richard Harrington as Chief Executive Officer, raise your hands. 4 hands went up slowly. All those expressing no confidence. 8 hands rose. Robert Chen counted twice. The motion carries, 8-4 with 2 abstentions. He turned to Richard. Mr. Harrington, the board has voted no confidence. Per our corporate bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Richard said nothing. He stood slowly, looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in my entire life. I expected rage, hatred, threats. What I saw was worse. Recognition. The understanding that he'd underestimated me so completely that he'd lost everything. He walked out without saying a single word. Richard caught me in the corridor outside 10 minutes later. Elizabeth was with him, her face streaked with tears. You ungrateful, Richard started. Richard, Elizabeth warned. Not here. She just destroyed our family in front of 14 people. I stood my ground. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth. Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer Morrison must have convinced her when she was vulnerable. Grandma Catherine wrote that will 6 months after you tried to strip her of power. She saw exactly who you are. You didn't lose because I betrayed you, Dad. You lost because you betrayed her. Elizabeth stepped forward. Sophie, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You didn't protect me. You erased me. Every Christmas dinner, every family photograph, every conversation where you talked about Victoria's achievements and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection, Mom. That was abandonment. I met my mother's eyes. I spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving anything to either of you. Richard grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will in court. I pulled free. You'll lose, and you know it. Because Grandma Catherine planned for every contingency, including this conversation. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice, broken. Sophie, please wait. I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed. I leaned against the wall, finally allowing myself to breathe. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving something unexpected. Not triumph. Grief. I just severed 29 years of hoping things would change. That hope was dead now. I'd killed it myself. David Morrison was waiting by the security desk. That was remarkable. It was necessary. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, and try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had. And the company? I don't want to be CEO. I never did. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who actually care about it. Morrison nodded. The board will want to meet with you soon. I know. But not today. I pushed through the door, felt the Boston sunlight hit my face. Today I just need to be Sophie Harrington. Not a shareholder, not a victim. Just myself. And tomorrow, I looked back at Harrington Tower, tomorrow I start building something completely new. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like I'd imagined. Richard signed his resignation and moved to Martha's Vineyard. Elizabeth and I met for lunch occasionally, awkward conversations where we tried to figure out how to be mother and daughter. Victoria and I talked every Sunday. Real conversations where she told me about therapy and I told her about running board meetings. We were building something fragile but honest. I took the position as Director of Innovation and Strategic Planning. Not CEO. I didn't want to run the company. I wanted to protect it, to honor what my grandmother had built. On my apartment wall, I hung Catherine's portrait. Sometimes late at night, I'd sit in front of it and tell her about my day. About the sustainable housing project I'd greenlit. About the employee wellness program. About the scholarship fund I'd created for students with learning disabilities. I think she'd be proud. Looking back, I understand something now. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% because I was better than Victoria or smarter than Richard. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me. Because she trusted that I would remember what actually matters. Dyslexia isn't my weakness. It's part of who I am. The skills I developed to compensate, the visual thinking, the pattern recognition, those are the things that made me see the truth when everyone else looked away. My parents judged worth by credentials. Catherine judged worth by how you treated people who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth. Not by what they say. By my own measure. My own truth. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth isn't determined by the people who failed to see it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment telling me your story. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people who found the courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time.